Hey everybody, welcome to the live stream. We're going to look at some very mysterious Jimmy Page movements, chords, and riffs. We'll look at this. And how this chord is really this chord with the C in the bass. And I have some good documentation on that. And then I want to look at what I think is maybe the greatest slow blues turnaround in the history of rock, Since I've Been Loving You. We'll look at the theory around that. And then I want to look at Ramble On, and there's a link below with an isolated guitar track that shows you the way he plays this on the record. It's pretty crazy. And it's different than the way he always plays it live. But first, I want to show you what I think is one of the greatest Jimmy Page riffs ever made. And it's often overlooked. Check out this pre-recorded clip. If you would like to slow that film down, just click the gear icon in the lower right corner of the YouTube video, and it'll offer you a 3/4 speed, a half speed, even a 1/4 speed. It might be a little fast for some people to grab. Just slow it down if you need to. So now let's move on to the mystery chord in Immigrant song. I always thought it was a C9 because there's a C in the bass, but I did some research and I found a great video by Gretchen Men. And she talks about how Alfred Music did the definitive sheet music transcription for Led Zeppelin, and it was with Jimmy Page's participation, and that it's actually this chord. But there's no D. The D is muted, and the way to grab it is to not use your little finger, and then that D gets muted naturally. But when I do that, I tend to pull it out of tune a little bit, so it's a bit of a challenge. I kind of do that with it. So it's really a G minor spelled. And the reason it sounds like a C is because John Paul Jones is playing a C in the bass. And even Jimmy Page was quoted as saying, the only person playing a C on that chord is John Paul Jones. So here we go. Now let's look at this amazing turnaround on Since I've Been Loving You, also off Led Zeppelin 3. Let's call out the chords first. So we've got C minor over E flat, then we got G over D, C minor over E flat again, and basically an E flat over B flat, although later John Paul Jones plays a very strong E flat 7 over the B flat, and then this really cool thing that happens next, which is D7 over A, and then D flat over A flat, basically that. But Page, in his wisdom, plays very simple sixth intervals. Very simple and very effective over these complex chords. And the turnaround is basically a secondary dominant. And so what that means, it's the D7 over A is the 5 of the 5, which is the D is the 5 of the G, which is the 5 of the C minor, which is home, which is the tonic. And then D flat major 7 over A flat. Okay, secondary dominant goes into tritone substitution, and that's what the D flat major 7 is, a substitute for the 5 chord. So let's walk through it one more time. So now let's move to Ramble On off Led Zeppelin 2. And there's an isolated version of this, isolated guitar track on YouTube. I'm going to leave you the link below where you can hear Page tune his guitar, and then he just bides his time waiting to pounce on this chorus. It's pretty amazing. You should listen to it. So it's this. And it's always astounded me, his choice of this F sharp minor chord here. I mean, it's the same. It happens in passing, and it adds so much color to it. And then he hybrid picks this. He plays just a piece of this D chord here and a piece of this G here. And live, he does it an easier way, because of course the guitar live is slung down at his knees, and he's just kind of strumming it. Live, it's more like this. Which sounds fine. But on the record, it's really unique, and he hybrid picks it. So before we take questions, let's just talk for a couple of minutes about Jimmy Page's gear. It's pretty fun. He was a very accomplished session musician, a session ringer as a young man before Led Zeppelin. In fact, some of the credits for him as a session player are Rolling Stones, Kinks, The Who, Joe Cocker, Petula Clark, Van Morrison, Cliff Richards, David Bowie. Of course, these were over an extended period of time, but you get the point. He was very versatile and very smart and doing a lot of work for a lot of people before Led Zeppelin. One of the guitars he used as a session player was a Gibson Black Beauty with 3 pickups and a Bigsby. But he also bought his Dan Electro during that period of time as an alternative to the Gibson, and that was only like 35 or 40 pounds. And that's the guitar that inspired him to write Kashmir, which was in Dad-Gad tuning, but in standard tuning, you can do it like this. So the Page Telecaster is the Dragoncaster, the legendary Dragoncaster with the mirrored pickguard and the hand-painted top, which Page painted himself. Amp-wise, the most famous amp is, of course, the Supro 58 Coronado that was used on Led Zeppelin 1. Supposedly a low-gain amp, but couldn't have been because it had a pair of 6L6s, so it had some output to it. Then Page moved on to some boxes. These were 120-watt boxes, these heads, and I think high watt for just a second, and then settled on Marshalls, the Marshall stacks that we see in so many photos. Now, the guitar we most associate with Jimmy Page is Les Paul number 1, it's called. It was the 59 Sunburst Les Paul that he bought from Joe Walsh. And Joe Walsh was generous enough to take him that guitar and say, you need to buy this. Because I guess Page was struggling with some feedback from his telly he was using on stage. And Walsh brought him this guitar and said, you should buy this from me. And Page said, I don't need to buy it. I already have a Les Paul. But I guess Joe persisted. Page tried it, he ended up buying it, and it became maybe the most famous Les Paul in history. He also ended up with another Les Paul later that they called number 2, but the famous one he got from the generosity and kindness of Joe Walsh. I have a very important and great question, I think, from a subscriber to start with, but before I do that, just a quick word. If you want to support this channel and you want guitar lessons, I believe our Masterclass can transform your guitar playing. We have a huge beginner's course, a near beginner's course, rhythm courses, And the most massive part of it, hundreds of videos for low, mid, and high intermediate players. There's a 14-day free trial. You can try with no obligation. There's a link below for a discount with this live stream. So I got a really, really important question, and that's because somebody's in pain right now. I got a question about wrist pain. And first of all, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining. And if you have any questions, feel to chat with them. I'd love to know what you want to know. Anyway, a gentleman asked about having wrist pain, and the only answer I can give is most of my energy for the right hand comes from the elbow and the forearm. So all the strength and all the motion basically they originate here. And then the wrist is kind of loosey-goosey. Corey Wong calls it a motor. And for me, the motor comes from the elbow and the forearm, and then the wrist is loose. And it's kind of like, it becomes effortless if you just free the wrist and keep it completely loose. Don't pick too hard. Pick too hard when you want to do it as an effect. Like some players actually play soft all the time. Like Alan Holdsworth was one of those players. I use a hard strike with the right hand as an effect, but I always lighten up. So you want to be able to keep every gradation of soft, medium, and loud with your right hand. But everything still originates here. Now, I had another question about pain on the left hand, and that comes, I think, just from pressing down too hard. What you want to do, make sure your guitar is not too hard to play. If your strings are too heavy and your action's too high, you're never going to solve this. So make sure it's comfortable, and then just do only the amount of pressure required to make the notes sound and no more. And here it's almost like physical therapy. You could even practice in front of the television, just pressing down light enough. Just teach yourself not to grip or press too hard. And the benefit of that too is your chords will sound more in tune. Because I just said, when I do this, if I do it with my third finger, I tend to pull too hard. So there's a perfect example. Anyway, this slow blues, I'm just going to play for a second and I'll look at some questions in the chat. This slow blues is maybe my favorite of all time. John Paul Jones is so brilliant. I mean, this band of ringers, they never even spent that much time recording these songs. You know, I did a lot of research for this live stream, and Andy Johns, who recorded some of their huge records, talks about how they just came in and basically played the stuff down, so they were prepared. And you guys really need to listen to this isolated Ramble On track because it's so loose and off the cuff. I mean, the brilliant thing about them is that nothing was precious. It all just kind of popped out. And, you know, in a lot of ways, that's rock. I mean, just this irreverent genius, but irreverence at the same time. Yeah, the great thing about slow blues playing is you can play in the pocket or you can leave the pocket. It's like, let me go past the turnaround here. I'll just go to another section. And you can just fly and ignore the pocket, or you can stay in the pocket, you know. can leave it. So I'll go back in the pocket. Out of pocket. Or back in. Somebody else today mentioned about they said it was too much pinky for them. I just, a lot of people play power chords with their third finger, but I had a guitar teacher who said, just play with your little finger. It's less of a stretch. No, it's not a tune. Let me tune up for you guys. And so I've always done it that way. I've always used the little finger a lot. And then my little finger, I share this with Phil X, my little finger is not as strong as it should be, so the more I use it, the better off I am. But you can do anything you see me do with the little finger, you can do it with the third finger too. I just, after you spend a number of years comfortable with doing power chords with your little finger and, these octaves and stuff, then you just kind of stick with it. That's really all it is. But if your hands are larger too, the third finger can be a better choice, I like to use my little finger because I like to keep it strong, because it's not strong. That's great. Here's a question about the Les Paul. So I was at Sweetwater about 3 years ago, and this Les Paul was out, and I picked it up, and I went, oh, this has a particular tone to it that seems like the ultimate Les Paul tone. And it wasn't too heavy, and it looked pretty cool, and I kept evaluating it, and I bought it, and it was not cheap. It's a Murphy Lab. They gave me a good deal, but it was these guitars are so overpriced. And there's something about the tone of it. There's a balance and a clarity. It's hard to describe. The way the notes ring together to me is somewhat magical. I think that's how kind of I tested it. It's like you play a major 7th chord. I mean, it's not often that a bridge humbucker on a guitar will ring like that. So Murphy Lab is where they take their best Les Pauls and they beat them up a little bit, and there's an upcharge, and it's kind of like the best Les Pauls that they sell. So it's a good bet if you find one you like. I love Les Pauls. I think in many ways the Les Paul is the greatest sounding guitar ever made because of the mid-range. It was like a lucky accident. Something about this thick mahogany back just makes the mid-range particularly strong. These days, my favorite amp right now is the Jet Black by Bad Cat. It's not an endorsement. I love these guys. I love the company. They're designing great amps. This amp, I think, was designed for Tosa Nobushi, and the clean channel is excellent. So check out Bad Cat if you're able to. They're making great amps, and they're not too expensive. I mean, amps are always expensive, but they're not too expensive. So yeah, this is the Jet Black, and it's a great platform for Edge of Breakup. I mean, you see what I'm saying about this guitar, the way the notes ring together? Like I can hear every note, and every note is sweet and balanced. Go to the neck. Wow. Somebody was asking about string gauges. These days, I actually experiment a lot. I use 10s for tone sometimes, 10 through 46. I use 9s for all-around hand comfort. And then I use 8s when I really want to pull a lot of strings and have it be easy. And the thing I've found is that certain guitars will do well with certain sets of strings. Like you can put eights on one guitar and it just sounds too thin and plinky. You can put eights on another guitar and it sounds fine. And there are people out there that believe that the eight sets, the light strings actually make amps sound better. So I like all three gauges. It's an argument for having more guitars, because if you have guitars sitting around with different gauges, you can experiment with that. The one thing I will say, I've said this before, if I use eights, my hands start to get weak. So I got to be really careful to make sure I at least stay on nines most of the time, because those keep my hands strong. My hands don't stay strong if I use eights. Bad Cats are made in Orange County, down the road, about a couple hours away from here. I'll go in again. Here I go. This has the Carmelita neck profile. I really like the 60s thin taper. This is a little bigger, but it's still comfortable. I think it's called a medium C Carmelita. Pocketing at all. I'm just playing freely. That's what's so great about slow blues. And then I went into the pocket at the end. Do I play acoustic guitars? If so, what are my favorites? I have a Taylor 514 CE Builder's Edition. That's amazing. I also have some old ones. I have a little Larrivee that's great. The orchestra models of acoustic guitars seem to actually record really, really well. Larger acoustics often have too much bottom end for recording, but acoustics are very difficult because if you play 100 acoustic guitars at every price range, at every level, there'll be a few good ones, and one of the good ones might be $300. The other good one might be $10,000. It's so random. Electric guitars can seemingly be made consistently, but acoustics, they all turn out so differently. So you almost have to go somewhere and try acoustics. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'd grab a friend who is an accomplished guitar player and have them help you and try the guitar. I mean, these new Taylors, they're pretty consistent from guitar to guitar, but I found with acoustics, you really do have to walk into a place, pick it up, play a C chord, an A minor chord, and hear how it sounds. And you don't want too much boominess. You want it to be balanced. You want it to have, I don't want my acoustic guitars to sound scooped. You want them to have plenty of nice mid-range, some nice articulate top end, and not too much bottom end. Yeah, so I do play acoustics, but these days I spend most of my time on electrics. G-Men is asking, where do I get the backing tracks? This is the actual record, and they will take the all the money from this video because I'm using this, and that is absolutely how it should be. This has been, we put it into Isotope, and it separates it into drums, bass, instruments, and vocals, and so I can turn off the vocals. And so there's another one called Moises, which you can do that with, M-O-I-S-E-S, but this is the master off the record. And generally, I've used this one before, generally the artists are kind enough to just take the royalties and let you use their stuff. Not every artist and not every situation. The Eagles are known for not allowing any of their music in any way, shape, or form to be used on YouTube. So we don't, and that's fine too. That's their prerogative. If you own the stuff, but I'm perfectly happy. Most of my videos are demonetized. There's another thing. If you want to support the channel, try out the Masterclass for guitar lessons, because most of my videos I end up using the masters of famous songs or doing a cover or a sound alike, and that means that I make no money from these videos. It's very, very minimal. So if you want to support the channel, see more of these videos, keep the thing going, and you want guitar lessons, just take a look at the Masterclass and the free trial. That's all you got to do. That's what supports the whole thing. Yeah, there you go, Jason. That's a perfect example. You spent 3 hours at Guitar Center and walked out with a $350 Ibanez acoustic with Grover's. Plays amazing. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Exactly. Like my favorite recording acoustic, it was in the 90s. I walked into a music store in Albuquerque. A Larrivee was hanging on the wall, and I played, and you really know, you just go, or, and you go, oh, that's the right balance. And so I bought that Larrivee, and I used it on records ever since. It's still sitting here. I even used it so much. I don't know if you guys have ever been through this. I wore out the first 4 frets. Check this out. I mean, there are vintage guitars that this happens to. My Larrivee that I bought, I used it so much on records, in sessions, that I literally wore out the first 4 frets. I had to get those frets replaced. It's crazy. It's the only time that's ever happened to me. Pretty amazing. A practice for eliminating unwanted string noise. Oh, this is such a great question, and I can weigh in on this quickly, easily, and robustly, I think. Okay, so every part of your hand that's not fretting a note, if I fret one note, these 2 fingers are laying across the adjacent strings, silencing them. And this thumb is laying next to the low E string and silencing it. And then even you go so far as when you really, really get used to this, these 2 fingers are actually laying against the A. So every note that's not being played is being silenced by the flesh that's available right here, right here. These 2 fingers are right next to this A, muting it. This finger, this thumb, is sitting right there, muting the low E. And then these 2 fingers, mostly the index finger, is laying across. So when I can literally go, I can strike all 6 strings and you only hear 1 because all the flesh that's left over, that's available on this hand, is muting the strings. Yes, and once you get used to it, it becomes second nature, and you can keep everything silent. It can happen. You can do it. But there were a couple of guitars that he played that we didn't mention. One was the Fender 12-string, the Fender Electric 12-string that he played on Stairway to Heaven. Also on Stairway to Heaven. Now this goes back. This is important. This goes back to our conversation about the right acoustic guitar. The guitar that he played, that Jimmy Page played on Stairway to Heaven, is a Harmony Sovereign, and that is an inexpensive acoustic guitar. I have one. It sounds like Stairway to Heaven. It's a perfect example. And when I researched the stuff for this week, he talked about how he was in between Martins, whatever. He just didn't have the expensive guitar. He had a Vox acoustic guitar and then this Harmony Sovereign, both inexpensive guitars that made some of the greatest sounding acoustic guitar sounds on record. So that goes back to exactly what we were talking about before. So yeah. So anyway, guys, check out the masterclass if you get a chance. I really want to thank you for being so kind and so supportive and showing up for this. I'm going to play us out, and we will see you guys on the next one. I'm going to bounce on out of here.